My name is Maya, and this is the story of how my own blood tried to bury me alive on Christmas Eve. The people who raised me, who I bled for, sat around a dinner table lit by candles I had paid for and told me I was nothing but a thief. By midnight, I was locked out of the only home I had ever known. My badge confiscated, my name dragged through the kind of mud that takes years to wash off. But the betrayal didn't end at the front door. They emptied an account I had built for my grandmother. They forged my signature on papers that could have ended my nursing career. They tried to take the only person in that house who still loved me, and when I refused to lie down and accepted, they hired someone to break into my apartment and listen to me sleep. I almost let them win. I almost believed the version of me they were selling to anyone who would listen. But then a folder showed up at a diner off Route 9, slid across a chipped formica table by a 78-year-old woman in pearls and a wool coat, and everything they had built came apart at the seams. It was snowing the night it happened. Boston was doing its usual Christmas Eve thing, the kind where the sky looks like a postcard, but the wind off the harbor goes straight through whatever coat you own. I had pulled a 16-hour shift at the trauma center the day before, and I remember thinking, as I drove home, that I had not slept in my own bed since Tuesday. I was an ER nurse. I was 31. And for the past 3 years, ever since my grandmother's stroke, I had been the one keeping that house running. The house belonged to my dad, Howard, on paper. But the bills came out of my checking account. The mortgage, the property tax, the home health aide who came 3 days a week, my grandmother Eleanor's medications, the special bed we had to rent, the ramp we put in over the front steps. My stepmother Bernadette had married my dad 11 years ago, right after my mom died, and she had never once worked a day in that marriage. She called herself a homemaker. What she made, mostly, was a list of things she wanted me to pay for. I walked in around 6 that night carrying a foil pan of green bean casserole I had picked up from the grocery store because no one in that house had cooked a thing. The tree was up. Bernadette had insisted on white lights only this year, no color, because color was tacky. My half-brother Jasper, who was 19 and home from a college I was also paying for, was on the couch with his phone. My grandmother was in her wheelchair by the window, wrapped in the afghan I had crocheted her 2 winters back when I was trying to learn. She looked up when I came in, and her eyes did that thing they did sometimes, where for just a second she was all there. "Maya, baby, you look tired." "I'm okay, Grandma. Did you eat?" "I'll eat with you." Bernadette came out of the kitchen wiping her hands on a towel she had not actually used. She gave me the smile she gave me, the one that did not reach above her cheekbones. "You're late. We've been waiting." I didn't argue. I never argued. I helped wheel Grandma to the table. I put the casserole down between the ham and the rolls. I sat in my usual chair across from my dad. He had been drinking. I could tell from across the room. There was a particular flush he got, a particular tightness in how he held his fork, and I had been reading it since I was 8 years old. We made it through grace. We made it through Bernadette's little speech about family and gratitude, which I noticed did not include anyone's name but her own and her son's. We were halfway through the meal when my dad set his glass down hard enough to rattle the silverware and looked at me like he had been waiting all day for this moment, which I learned later he had. "Maya, we need to talk about the missing money." I remember the way the room went quiet. I remember the way Jasper looked at his plate, which told me he already knew what was coming. I remember the way my grandmother's hand froze over her water glass. "What missing money?" $12,400, Bernadette said, and her voice was so steady I knew she had practiced it, out of your grandmother's checking account, over the last 6 months. I looked at my dad. He would not meet my eyes. "That's the account I used to pay her aid and her medications. You both know that. I have receipts for every withdrawal. You have receipts you wrote yourself," my dad said. I felt something cold start at the back of my neck and travel down. "What are you accusing me of?" "We're not accusing," Bernadette said. "We're telling you what we know, and we're telling you that as of tonight, your name is coming off all of Eleanor's accounts. Howard is taking over the medical power of attorney. You are not welcome to come back here until you can explain yourself." "Until I can explain myself." Until you can explain yourself, she repeated. I looked at my grandmother. She was crying, silently the way she did everything now since the stroke, but crying. And I realized she had been told this was coming and had not been able to find the words to warn me. I stood up. Slowly. I set my napkin on my plate. I walked around to my grandmother, and I bent down and I kissed her forehead and I told her I loved her. Then I went upstairs to the room that had been mine since I was a child, and I packed 2 bags, my scrubs, my laptop, the little fireproof box I kept under the bed with my nursing license, my passport, my mother's wedding ring, and a flash drive I had been keeping for 3 years that they did not know existed. When I came back down, Bernadette was standing by the door with my house key in her hand. She held it out, palm flat, like I was supposed to put it there. Your father wants the badge too. My hospital badge? Your house key for here. And he wants the spare to the safe deposit box, the one with Grandma's papers. That's not yours to ask for. Maya. My dad had come up behind her. He still would not look at me. Just give it to her, don't make this worse. I gave them the house key. I did not give them the safe deposit key. They did not know I had moved everything important out of there 2 months earlier when I caught Bernadette going through my grandmother's drawer looking for it. I drove to my friend Talia's apartment in Somerville with snow piling on my windshield faster than the wipers could clear it. I did not cry until I was sitting in her hallway with my 2 bags at my feet and she was on her knees in front of me asking me what happened. Then I cried for about 40 minutes straight and she did not say a single thing. She just held my hands and let me. Talia was an ICU nurse. She had been my best friend since our second year of nursing school. She had a couch that pulled out into a bed and she made it up for me before I even asked. Around 2 in the morning, I sat up in the dark of her living room and I opened my laptop. I had a feeling, the kind of feeling you get when you have spent years watching someone you love be unkind to people quietly. I logged into the joint account where I deposited my paycheck. The account my dad had access to because it was attached to the household bills. There were 3 pending withdrawals, 2,000, 2,000, 1,800, all initiated within the last 6 hours. I called the bank's 24-hour line. I sat on hold for 38 minutes. When a human finally picked up, I told her my dad was attempting fraud and I needed every account frozen, every joint authorization revoked, every password changed. She asked me a series of questions to verify I was who I said I was. She told me the withdrawals would not go through. She told me she was flagging the account. Then I opened a new browser tab and I started a list. Mortgage payment, property tax bill due in March, electric, gas, water, internet, the home health aid, the medical supply rental, the pharmacy auto refill for my grandmother's prescriptions. Every single one of those was in my name and on my card. Every single one. I unsubscribed. I canceled. I removed my payment method. I called the aid service first thing in the morning and told them my access to the account had been revoked and they would need to contact the account holder, which was my dad, for further service. I called the pharmacy and told them the same thing. I called the medical supply company. The hospital bed they had rented for my grandmother, the one I had been paying $800 a month for, I called and authorized the return pickup for the following Monday. This was not revenge. This is what I want anyone listening to understand. This was me removing my name from a story I had never agreed to be in. They had told me I was a thief. Fine, I would let them see what the house looked like without the thief in it. I slept on Talia's couch for 9 days. On the 3rd day, my phone started ringing and it did not stop. My dad called 14 times. Bernadette called twice. Jasper texted once, "Just what did you do?" which told me everything I needed to know about which side of that house he was on. I did not answer any of them. The aide called me directly, confused, and I explained as gently as I could that I was no longer in a position to coordinate her services. She told me she was sorry. She told me my grandmother had asked for me that morning. On the 5th day, a woman I had not spoken to in 8 years messaged me on social media. I heard about what happened. I'm so sorry your dad is going through this. Family is everything. You should be ashamed of yourself. I stared at that message for a long time. Then I scrolled down and I saw it. Bernadette had posted a long, weeping update about how her dear husband's daughter had been stealing from her grandmother for months, about how heartbroken they were. about how they had finally confronted me on Christmas Eve, and I had screamed at them and stormed out, and now refused to take any of their calls. She had used a picture of my grandmother. She had used a picture of me from the hospital, in scrubs, that I had not given her permission to post. I sat there in Talia's kitchen with my coffee going cold, and I felt something shift. It was not anger anymore. Anger I knew. Anger I knew. Anger is hot. This was cold. This was the cold a surgeon feels right before she picks up the scalpel. I opened my own page. I had maybe 200 followers, mostly nursing school people, a few cousins. I wrote one paragraph. I am Maya. I have been paying my grandmother's medical bills, my father's mortgage, and my stepmother's utilities for 3 years. On Christmas Eve, I was accused, with no evidence, of stealing from my grandmother and told to leave the family home. I left. I also stopped paying their bills. If you are hearing a different version, I would like you to know it came from people who have not earned the right to tell my story. I hit post, I closed my laptop, I went to work. By the time I came home from a 12-hour shift, the post had been shared 400 times. By the next morning, it had been shared 2,000. People I had grown up with started messaging me. Family I had not spoken to in years. My mother's sister, who lived in Vermont and who I had lost touch with after my mom died, called me crying. She said she had always known something was off in that house. She said my mom would have been proud of me. That was the moment I started feeling like a person again. 3 days later was when I noticed the car. A dark blue sedan parked across the street from Talia's building. It was there in the morning when I left for my shift. It was there at night when I came home. The next day it was a different car but parked in the same spot. The day after that, my recycling bin, the only one on the block, knocked over. I told Talia. I expected her to tell me I was being paranoid. She did not. She told me to take the bus home from work the next day so my car would not be visible, and she told me she was going to have a friend of hers from the gym, a guy named Diego who did some kind of contract security work, come by and walk through the apartment. Diego came by that night. He was quiet, thorough. He looked at the locks. He looked at the windows. He asked if I had recently been in a public argument with anyone. I told him about the post. He nodded slowly. "You're going to want cameras," he said. "Front door, hallway, fire escape. I can set them up for you tomorrow." That night I went to bed and I dreamed about my grandmother. In the dream she was standing, no wheelchair, no Afghan, and she was holding the flash drive I had hidden in my fireproof box. "You know what to do with this," she said. "You've always known." I had hidden that flash drive 3 years earlier, the week after my grandmother's stroke. She had given it to me before they took her into surgery. She had pressed it into my palm and folded my fingers around it and told me, in that strange, clear way, the very afraid have, if anything happens to me, this goes to my lawyer, not your father. Promise me. I had promised. I had not looked at what was on it. I had just put it in the fireproof box and put the box under my bed, and after she came out of surgery and could not say more than 2 words at a time for the next 6 months, I had honestly half forgotten about it. The next morning, I drove to a coffee shop in Brookline with my laptop. I bought the largest coffee they sold. I sat in the back corner. I plugged in the drive. There were 47 files. Bank statements. A scanned copy of a will dated 4 years prior, with my grandmother's signature and a notary stamp. Audio recordings, dozens of them, labeled by date. Photos of documents. A letter addressed to me, written in her shaky post-stroke handwriting but dated from before, when her hands still worked. "Maya, if you are reading this, things have gone the way I feared. Your father has been borrowing against the house I gave him in trust. He has been doing it for years. Bernadette knows. Her brother helps them do it. There is a man named Theodore Ainsworth who has been buying my husband's old debts and offering your father money in exchange for the property when I die. Bernadette has been speaking to him for at least 2 years. I am telling you because you are the only person who has ever loved me without asking what was in it for them. I am sorry to put this on you. I trust you to do what's right." I sat in that coffee shop for 2 hours. I did not move. I did not blink as much as I should have. By the time I closed the laptop, the coffee was cold, and I had stopped feeling the room around me. Theodore Ainsworth. I had never heard the name. I looked him up on my phone. Real estate. Old Boston money. 2 charges of elder financial exploitation in Massachusetts and Connecticut, both settled out of court. There were articles. He had a habit of buying distressed family debts and pressuring heirs to sign over inherited properties at fractions of their value. So that was the game. That had always been the game. Bernadette had not married my dad because she loved him. She had married him because there was an old woman in a back bedroom sitting on a house worth $2.5 million in a Boston neighborhood that had gentrified into the stratosphere. I called Talia. I told her I needed a lawyer. She gave me the number of an elder law attorney who had handled her grandmother's estate. The woman's name was Rosa Quintana, and her office was in a brownstone in the South End, and she had the kind of calm in her voice that told me she had seen worse than what I was about to tell her. I went in the next morning. I brought the flash drive. I brought my own bank records, 3 years of them, showing every dime I had spent on that house. I brought screenshots of Bernadette's social media post. I brought the letter from my grandmother. Rosa read the letter twice. Then she looked up at me. "This is significant. We need to get your grandmother evaluated by an independent geriatric psychiatrist before they try to revoke her capacity. We need to do it this week, and we need to file an emergency petition for guardianship review. Right now, on paper, your father has medical power of attorney. We need to challenge that. Can we? With this evidence? Yes. We can also report Mr. Ainsworth to the State Attorney General's Elder Abuse Unit. If your grandmother is willing to talk to me, we can do a lot more than that. She's not always there, some days more than others. Yes. Then we pick a good day. I drove back to Talia's that night, and I sat in my car in the parking lot for a long time before I went up. The sedan was there again. Different car, same spot. I pulled out my phone and I took a picture of the license plate. I sent it to Diego. He texted back inside of 3 minutes. "Plates are registered to a rental company. We'll run it. Stay inside tonight." That was the night I came home from a Tuesday shift to find my apartment door cracked open by the width of a credit card. I had locked it that morning. I had double-locked it. Talia was at her own boyfriend's place. I was alone in that hallway. I called Diego from where I stood. He told me not to go in. He told me he would be there in 11 minutes. He arrived in 9. The lock had been picked, not forced. Whoever had been in there had wanted me to know they could come and go. Nothing was missing. My laptop was where I had left it. My fireproof box was where I had left it, but when I checked, the flash drive was no longer in the little zippered pouch where I always kept it. I had transferred everything important to cloud storage 2 days earlier on Rose's advice, but my heart still dropped when I saw that empty pocket. We called the police. The officer who came took a report and told me without quite saying so that there was not much they could do about a break-in where nothing was missing and nothing was forced. Diego waited until the officer left, and then he asked me, quietly, if I would let him sweep the apartment for listening devices. He found 2. One in the smoke detector over the kitchen table. One stuck to the underside of my nightstand. I did not sleep that night. I sat at Talia's kitchen table with all the lights on, and I made a list of every conversation I had had in that apartment in the past 3 weeks. Every phone call to Rosa, every conversation with Talia about strategy, every late-night call to my aunt in Vermont. They knew. Whoever they were, they knew everything. The next morning, Rosa filed 3 things at once: a petition for a court-ordered review of my grandmother's capacity, a request for an independent guardian ad litem to be appointed for my grandmother, a criminal complaint with the Elder Abuse Unit naming my father, my stepmother, and Theodore Ainsworth. By Friday, a judge had granted the capacity evaluation. By the following Tuesday, a court-appointed psychiatrist had visited my grandmother at the house and conducted a private evaluation. By Wednesday afternoon, Rosa called me with the result. She's lucid. She's been lucid the whole time on this specific question. She told the psychiatrist in detail that you have been her caregiver and that the household has been financially dependent on you for years. She also told her about Theodore Ainsworth by name, and described a conversation she overheard between your stepmother and her brother last spring. Can she do that? Will it hold up? She's medically competent to give that testimony. The judge has already granted us a temporary order suspending your father's medical power of attorney pending further review. He doesn't know yet. They will be served tomorrow morning. I had to sit down for that part. I had been standing in the break room at the hospital. I sat down on the linoleum floor with my back against the lockers and my phone pressed to my ear, and I cried in a way I had not cried since I was a child. That Friday evening, my aunt drove down from Vermont with a black SUV and a deeply pissed-off attitude. We picked my grandmother up from a court-approved respite facility where she had been placed for her own safety 3 days earlier, after the order was served, and Bernadette had spent 45 minutes screaming at her in the kitchen. The social worker who had been monitoring the situation had called the police. The police had called Rosa. Rosa had called the judge. By 6 p.m., my grandmother was in protective placement and my dad was being told he could not see her without supervision. I met my grandmother in the lobby of the respite facility. She was in her wheelchair. She was holding the Afghan I had made her. When she saw me, she lifted one hand, the one that still worked all the way, and she said very clearly, "There's my girl." I knelt down next to her chair, and I put my forehead against her knee, and I did not say anything for a long time. The next morning, Rosa called me and asked if I could come to her office. There was, she said, something I needed to see. I drove over. Rosa had her laptop turned around to face me when I sat down. Theodore Ainsworth's attorney sent us a settlement offer last night. For what? For dropping the criminal complaint. He's offering you $200,000 personally and a written withdrawal of any claim against your grandmother's property. I stared at the screen. $200,000, more money than I had ever seen in one place. Enough to pay off my nursing school loans, put a down payment on a small condo, breathe for the first time in a decade. He's scared, Rosa said. He's scared of what your grandmother can testify to. He's scared of what's on that flash drive. What do you advise? I advise you to consider it carefully. He's offering you safety and money. If you turn him down, this becomes a public criminal case. It will be in the news. Your stepmother and possibly your father will likely be indicted. The press will follow this. Are you prepared for that? I thought about it. I thought about it for about 90 seconds, which I am sure was less time than Rosa expected. Tell him to go to hell. Rosa smiled. She had a very small smile, very controlled, but I saw it. I thought you might say that. The hearing was set for a Tuesday in late February. By the time we got there, Rosa had subpoenaed 7 years of bank records from 3 different banks. She had a forensic accountant who had traced every dollar my father had borrowed against the house. She had emails between Bernadette and Theodore Ainsworth that her brother had handed over in a plea agreement because her brother had decided he was not going to prison alone. She had my grandmother's letter, which had been authenticated against 3 earlier samples of her handwriting. She had the audio recordings from the flash drive, which turned out to be my grandmother in the months after her stroke, recording every conversation she could capture from her wheelchair using a little voice recorder she had hidden under her Afghan. There were conversations in there that froze the courtroom. There was a moment where Bernadette told my dad, very plainly, "The old bat is going to outlive us at this rate. We need to move on Ainsworth's offer before she dies, and the trust ties everything up." My dad's attorney withdrew before the hearing was over. He literally stood up and said he was no longer able to represent his client in good conscience and asked to be released. The judge granted it. The temporary order became permanent. My father lost medical power of attorney for good. Bernadette was indicted 3 weeks later on charges of elder financial exploitation, conspiracy, and forgery after they found a power of attorney document with my grandmother's signature on it from a month when my grandmother had been in inpatient rehab and incapable of signing anything. Theodore Ainsworth was indicted on 5 counts, 3 of them felonies. His name made the Boston Globe. 2 other families came forward within the week with similar stories. My grandmother came to live with me. We rented a first-floor apartment together in Watertown, with grab bars and a wide doorway and a window that looked out onto a small garden. The aide who had worked with us before came back. My aunt drove down on weekends. Talia came over almost every Sunday. My grandmother lived another 2.5 years. She got to see one more spring and one more Christmas, and a real one with color lights because she said white lights were tacky and she had always said so. The last thing she said to me, the morning she died, was, "You saved me." I told her she had it backwards, and she just smiled the way she always smiled and she closed her eyes. I don't talk to my father anymore. He sent me a letter last summer. I did not open it. Bernadette is doing 4 years in a state facility in Framingham. Jasper finished college on loans this time, and he has tried to reach out twice. I have not responded yet, maybe one day. He was 19, he was scared. I don't know what I would have done at 19. What I know is this. The people who told me I was a burden were the ones who could not survive without me. The people who called me a thief were the ones with their hands in the till. The story they tried to write about me did not stick, because I had been quietly keeping receipts for years, and because a tired old woman in a wheelchair had been braver than any of us knew. If you are listening to this and someone has told you that you are too much or not enough, or that the love you give is not worth what you cost, I want you to remember something. The ones who say that are almost always the ones who are afraid of who you will become when you stop believing them. Walk out. Take your name off the bills. Make the list. Keep the receipts. And when the moment comes, and it will come, do not take the money. Take the truth. Your story belongs to you. Don't ever hand the pen to someone who has already shown you they will lie. Looking back now with my grandmother's Afghan folded on the chair beside me and a quiet apartment around me, I understand something I could not see when I was inside the storm. Every single thing that happened to my father, to Bernadette, to Theodore Ainsworth, every charge, every headline, every locked door, was not bad luck and it was not fate. It was the natural arithmetic of choices they had been making for years. Bernadette did not stumble into prison. She walked there one decision at a time, starting the night she decided an old woman in a wheelchair was a balance sheet instead of a person. My father did not lose everything because the world was cruel to him. He lost it because he had quietly traded his integrity for comfort over and over until there was nothing left to trade. What I want anyone listening to take from my story is not about revenge. It looks like revenge from the outside. It feels good to say I canceled the mortgage payment. It feels good to say Bernadette is in Framingham. But the real lesson runs deeper than that. 3 things kept me alive through those months, and I think they are the only 3 things that ever really keep anyone alive when their world catches fire. The first is honesty. Plain, boring, daily honesty. I kept receipts not because I expected to need them, but because I had been raised by my grandmother to write things down and tell the truth even when no one was watching. That habit, which had felt small and tedious for years, was the foundation that held when everything else collapsed. If you do nothing else with your life, be the kind of person whose records match their words. The people around you may not notice for a long time. One day, it will save you. The second is patience for your own intelligence. I almost did not look at that flash drive for 3 years. My grandmother had handed me the answer to everything, and I had filed it under the bed because I was tired and busy and did not want to deal with it. Wisdom is mostly the discipline to stop and pay attention to the things you already know, but have been too overwhelmed to face. Slow down enough to read the letter. Slow down enough to see the pattern. The truth is almost always sitting somewhere you have already been. The third is the kind of nerve that does not flinch when the offer arrives. Theodore Ainsworth tried to hand me $200,000 to make me quiet, and I want to be honest, part of me wanted to take it. The exhaustion was real. The fear was real, but you cannot build a life on money that came in exchange for your silence. Bernadette had tried to live on exactly that kind of money for 11 years, and look where it put her. Strength is not the absence of fear. Strength is choosing the harder right answer while you are still afraid. My grandmother used to say the people who try to break you almost always show you very early exactly who they are. The work is having the courage to believe them the first time.